when that peculiar dowry chest, carved with painstaking labor from a century-old walnut tree and inlaid with mother-of-pearl, tumbled down the cold marble stairs of the mansion with a deafening clatter and shattered into pieces at the final step, it was not merely the sound of dry wood splintering that echoed through that grand, opulent hall. It was the ruthless pulverization of an orphan's dignity, the final memento bequeathed by her mother, and the honor of the downtrodden. Asiya Hanum stood at the top of the stairs like a demon of hell within her gold-embroidered caftan, breathing fire through her arrogance and radiating hatred from her eyes as she looked down at the scattered remains of that empty chest. Meanwhile, Elif huddled among the broken shards of wood at the foot of the stairs, pulling her knees to her chest, weeping silently while her heart bled profusely. Before the arrogant, wealthy guests and the sycophantic servants of the mansion, Asiya Hanum screamed at the top of her lungs as if tearing her throat apart. "You came to my grand household as a parasite with nothing but an empty woodworm-eaten chest. For years you have eaten my bread and been fed at my table. You have no dowry, no roots, no nobility. Now gather your broken, disgusting wood, your rags, and get out of this house." Yet there was a profound and terrifying truth that this monument of pride, this woman blinded by greed, failed to grasp or had forgotten. That which gilded the roof of the mansion and poured that seemingly inexhaustible wealth into the household was nothing other than the divine blessing within the calloused, long-suffering hands and the pure heart of Elif, the owner of that very chest she so despised.
Dear friends, welcome to a profound, jarring, and epic journey where you will witness how ingratitude and pride dragged a man and an entire family into a bottomless pit of hell and misery. How the silent tears of an orphan, humiliated and trampled upon for having no dowry, no mother, and no father, turned a vast fortune in those seemingly impenetrable centuries-old mansions into ash and smoke in a single night, and how the magnificent and unerring scales of divine justice are balanced. Before we delve into this exemplary and sacred story, which you will feel to your very core, and where you will confront your own conscience and shed tears at every line, if the eternal and sublime fire of the righteous, the oppressed, loyalty, and divine justice burns in your heart as well, please help this fire of goodness reach more people in more wounded, lonely hearts by liking this video, subscribing to our channel, and sharing it with your loved ones. When Elif first opened her eyes in that poor, remote mountain village, where even the sky hesitated to show mercy, the soil was forever parched and stony, and winters passed with relentless storms, her fate had already been woven with those thin, sorrowful, and pitch-black threads. Her father, the pillar of that home, was struck by a relentless and incurable consumption when Elif was still a nursing infant in her wooden cradle. Before he could even savor the scent of his child or that innocent face, he departed from this fleeting world to the eternal realm, coughing up blood. In her husband's premature and painful absence, her mother braved the harsh winters and the back-breaking labor of the fields alone, struggling to raise Elif by digging into the earth with her bare nails and working as a day laborer in the fields of others.
Yet poverty is a relentless wolf, gnawing not only at one's flesh and bone, but at the very soul and lifespan of a human being. It is an unceasing, merciless predator that consumes one from within. Just as Elif had seen but 14 springs and was beginning to bloom, her mother could no longer bear that heavy burden. She could endure that endless suffering no longer. Before drawing her final breath, she lay in that ramshackle, windswept mud brick house. With trembling hands, she stroked the coal-black hair of her daughter, who wept at her bedside. She caressed her with those frail, ice-cold hands. A faint oil lamp flickered in the room. Beneath the light, she gestured toward that wooden, weathered dowry chest standing in the corner. "My dear child, my precious one," she said, with a wheezing, broken voice rising from her chest. "I could leave you neither a pouch of gold, nor a dram of silver, nor a piece of silk. Nor could I leave you a gold-embroidered quilt. The only inheritance left to you from both your father and me is this poverty. This chest is empty, yet it is filled with my prayers reaching for the heavens and with my tears. Wherever you go, always carry your virtue, your modesty, your stainless honor, and your patience. Remember, my beautiful daughter, a woman's greatest dowry is her pure, sincere heart." These were the final words to spill from her long-suffering mother's parched lips, and she closed her eyes to eternity. Aleph clung to her mother's lifeless body and wailed for hours. Embracing that empty chest, she fell into the ice-cold embrace of loneliness and orphanhood. Years chased years. As months wore away, Aleph grew up through the mercy of neighbors. To avoid begging from door to door, she worked as a farmhand in the fields, just for a meal. Picking cotton and gleaning wheat, she blossomed into a young and beautiful woman.
She had nothing to her name, not even a single copper bowl. Yet she possessed such a noble bearing, such a radiant, angelic countenance. And her hands were so skilled, so gifted, that every soil she touched would flourish, and the simple rugs she wove would almost find a voice. She spread healing to all around her with her grace. Roses would seemingly bloom wherever she walked. She enchanted everyone with her serenity. Yet in the village, among those ignorant folk, the worth of a young woman was unfortunately measured not by her virtue, honor, or patience, but by the weight of the gold in her chest and the luster of the silver in her dowry. It was measured by the meager parcels of land left by her father. A girl without a dowry, no matter how beautiful or modest, was a dejected waif. She was deemed a slave, a servant without pay. The wealthiest, most influential family in the village, who claimed to own the very earth with their riches, was Asiye Hanım and her only son, Halil. Asiye Hanım had cunningly multiplied the vast inheritance in the fields left by her husband. She was a cruel matriarch whose heart had turned to stone, a block of ice, under the cold glint of gold. Her son, Halil, on the other hand, had been eclipsed under his mother's heavy dominion and crushing pressure. He was a timid man with no will of his own, unable to stray even a single step from his mother's word. One day, while inspecting the fields at his mother's command, Halil saw Aleph under the sun. He saw her picking cotton in the heart of that scorching heat, with sweat dripping from her brow. The girl's modest posture, her silent nobility with her head bowed, fell like fire into Halil's heart. Her radiant face, shining as the sun struck it, completely captivated his soul.
For the first time in his life, yes, for the very first time, Halil dared to defy his mother. Braving her furrowed brow, he declared his desire to marry Aleph, confessing that his heart now belonged to that orphaned girl. When Asiye Hanım heard this dreadful news, she turned the mansion upside down. She screamed at the top of her lungs and lashed out at the servants. To deem an orphan, one without a dowry, dressed in rags, starving, and from a withered lineage, worthy of their noble blood and 7 generations of wealth, was the ultimate insult. It was a slap in the face to her immense pride and her status as the matriarch. Yet later, as she sat bubbling her hookah in the darkness of the night, she made a sinister, diabolical, and dark calculation. Bringing a wealthy bride of noble birth into the house would mean dealing with her whims and demands. She would have to adorn her with armfuls of gold, and eventually share the management of the mansion and the keys to the vast estate. A rich girl would never bow to her dominion.
But if she took in an orphan like Elif, someone alone, unprotected, with no father to defend her, she wouldn't spend a single penny. Moreover, she would gain an obedient servant, a slave who would perform every chore in the mansion for free. With this devious, filthy thought and that infamous, chillingly contemptuous smile on her lips, she gave her outward consent to her son's wish, acting as if she were granting a great favor. In a ceremony so lackluster it could hardly be called a wedding, resembling a house of mourning instead, Elif stepped across the threshold of that great stone mansion, trembling with fear. The only thing she brought with her was her mother's empty wooden dowry chest, carried on her back. When the arrogant women gathered in the mansion's wide courtyard saw Elif's old wooden chest, they covered their mouths, giggling and mocking her, whispering as they looked her up and down.
"Ha! Look at the bride," they mocked. "Mice are dancing in her dowry chest. She arrived with nothing but the clothes on her back." Asiye Hanım stood before Elif in the middle of the crowd. Her face bore a ruthless, ice-cold expression, her eyes glinting like a serpent's. "Listen to me, girl," she said, her voice echoing across the courtyard and against the stone walls. "You entered these gates with nothing but your bare soul, that hollow, useless chest, and the rags you are wearing. You have no gold-embroidered linens, no copper bowls, not a single piece of gold to bring us pride or joy. You have brought us nothing but a vast void. From this moment forth, the prosperity and honor of this house belong to me. Your duty is not to be a wife to your husband, but a servant to this household. Do not be deceived by our wealth. Do not think yourself the mistress of this manor just because your belly is full. Your place is not by my side, but in the darkest corner of the kitchen, the coldest, filthiest part of the stable. You will know your place." Elif silently swallowed these poisonous splinters, these heavy insults piercing her heart. She let the warm tears welling in her eyes flow inward. With her head bowed and shoulders slumped, she resigned herself to her fate and kissed her mother-in-law's hand. Halil, however, could not utter a single word against his mother's cruelty. He failed to defend his wife, turning his head away and retreating into a coward's silence. From that day on, Elif's earthly purgatory began. She would rise before the first light of dawn, before the roosters even crowed, while the frost bit to the bone, scrubbing the stone floors of the great manor on her knees, mucking out the stables, cooking for dozens of laborers, and scrubbing laundry in the freezing waters of the stream until her hands bled and cracked. She did not stop until she collapsed from exhaustion at night, sustaining herself on a single bowl of soup a day.
As Asiye Hanım sat perched upon her silk-cushioned divan, sipping her coffee, she would seize every opportunity to mock Elif's empty dowry chest. In front of guests, she would humiliate her, calling her a pauper, a stray, a greedy soul, a cat fed at her door, feeding her own loathsome arrogance. Yet the justice of the Almighty had hidden within the hands of that silent, lonely girl such a magnificent secret, such a divine grace. He had concealed such abundance that soon the entire mansion and even the great city itself would be shaken by this miracle. At night, when everyone had fallen into a deep slumber, when all the lights in the mansion were extinguished, Elif would walk, exhausted, her bones aching. She would make her way to the old, abandoned loom in the cold, cobwebbed attic of the mansion. By candlelight, she mingled her tears with the thread, weaving her deep sorrow and her loneliness. She wove her longing for her mother and her patience into that loom, stitch by stitch, knot by knot. The carpets and rugs emerging from Elif's skillful, suffering hands were no ordinary objects. They were masterpieces that seemed to possess a soul. They were unique works of art, their natural dyes glowing like the sun, their motifs harboring a grand nobility and a sense of poetry. One day, while Halil was taking the harvest to town, he saw one of the carpets Elif had secretly woven in the dead of night and set aside. By chance, he loaded one of those carpets, which she had placed in an old sack, onto the cart among the other goods.
When the great merchants of the town saw that carpet spread out in the marketplace, they nearly lost their minds. One of the city's greatest and wealthiest pashas could not put a price on that labor of love, whose colors burned like fire. In return, he handed Halil a pouch full of solid gold, a sum so vast it left him stunned. From that day forward, the fate of the mansion, of Asiya Hanım, and of Halil was transformed forever.
The carpets, the silk rugs, and the handiwork that Elif wove through sleepless nights, her fingers bleeding and her hands scarred by needle pricks, were no longer sold only to the town. They began to be sent to palaces, to viziers, to distant lands, and via caravans to vast kingdoms. Those hands of Elif, once called poor and destitute, once belittled for having no dowry, had brought the household an unimaginable fortune as vast as mountains, a bounty that flowed like a roaring river. The lands surrounding the mansion multiplied, territories of neighboring villages were acquired, and the livestock in the stables exceeded 1,000, overflowing the barns. The gold around Asiya Hanım's neck and the twisted bracelets on her arms became so heavy they were almost impossible to bear. The household had become the wealthiest, most powerful, and most talked about not just in the town, but in the entire province. Money flowed like water. Yet it was precisely here, amidst the clinking of gold, that the raw essence of human nature, that ungrateful disposition, revealed its dark, its diabolical face. As Asiya Hanım became buried in that inexhaustible wealth, that gold and luxury, she completely denied the true source of this immense blessing, the calloused hands that brought forth such abundance. Her pride grew so immense, her ego so inflated, that a dark, impenetrable veil fell over her eyes. She began to claim that she had earned this vast fortune through her own intellect, her noble lineage, and her superior commercial wit. And fueled by the sycophants around her, she came to believe it with all her heart. Aylin's silent, humble, and impoverished presence, her patched clothes, began to clash with Asiya Hanım's opulent world and her gold-embroidered halls, appearing to her eyes like a thorn, like a festering sore.
Ashamed of Elif's peasant features and her weary state in the presence of the arrogant, wealthy city dwellers, pashas, and merchants who arrived from afar, Asiya Hanım would lock her in the kitchen, strictly forbidding her from appearing before the guests or revealing that she was the bride of this household under any circumstances. To them, she would tell the lie, "This girl is our stablemate." One day, an immensely wealthy merchant family from the city arrived at the mansion in horse-drawn carriages, accompanied by dozens of guards. They had a flamboyant, spoiled daughter around Halil's age, dripping in gold and swathed in silks. This girl's arrogance was no less than that of Asiya Hanım. Asiya Hanım was blinded by ambition, a craving for greater wealth, and a desire to expand into the city. At midnight, she summoned Halil to her room and stood before him. "My son," she said in a venomous whisper, "that penniless peasant girl does not suit a great lord like you. She tarnishes our reputation. I shall marry you to the daughter of this great merchant. We will add glory to our name and fortune to our wealth. And that girl, we shall cast her back into the gutter, the street where she came from." Faced with his mother's crushing authority, Halil once again retreated into his spineless, gutless silence. He did not even object. Bowing his head, he submitted to his mother's diabolical plan. Elif overheard this horrific betrayal from the kitchen door, a tray of hot soup in her hands. Upon hearing it, her heart was torn in two. Her tears fell silently onto the tray. For years, she had been a slave to this household, enriching them with the labor of her hands. Yet she had not been treated with even as much humanity as an animal. Asiya Hanım, that cruel woman, took matters even further the following day. As preparations for the wedding with the city girl began, she had Elif summoned to the grandest hall of the vast mansion.
In front of all the servants, stewards, and laborers, she screamed at the top of her lungs, spewing venom and humiliation. There is no longer a place for you or your foul peasant stench in this noble household. Our new aristocratic bride is on her way. I will not permit a penniless, ill-omened orphan like you to lie in that great bed, upon those silk sheets. Gather your tattered rags and that empty dowry chest your mother gave you and leave these lands at once. May every morsel of my bread be cursed to you." With silent and noble tears streaming from her eyes, Elif went to her room without uttering a single word, without begging for a moment, refusing to let her dignity be trampled under the feet of the cruel. She embraced the only memory left of her mother, that empty wooden chest. As she descended the stairs slowly with a great fire burning in her heart, Asiye Hanum could not contain her rage and pride. She ran after her, violently snatching the wooden chest from Elif's hands and kicking it down the marble stairs with a powerful blow. The chest struck the marble steps with a deafening crash, tumbling and shattering into pieces. The splintering of the wood pierced through Elif's very soul. This was the pivotal moment, the breaking point we spoke of at the very beginning of our story. Elif descended the stairs, knelt to gather the broken fragments of the chest, and pressed them tightly to her chest. She looked into Asiye Hanum's face one last time, not with fear, but with pity, with the profound gaze of the oppressed who seeks refuge in the Almighty and sends their lament to the heavens. She wiped her tears and lifted her head high. "My chest was empty, Mother," she said, her voice trembling yet sharp. "But in that chest were my mother's tears, my innocent compassion, and the blessing and grace of the Almighty. You did not just break old wood. With your pride, you have destroyed the prosperity of your own household, the invisible great pillar of your own home."
May God grant you the coldness, the very hell of that gold you so trusted, for which you sacrificed an orphan. On that stormy, snow-swept dark winter night, wearing only a thin woolen cardigan and clutching a broken piece of wood, Elif stepped out of that ungrateful, cursed mansion and vanished into the pitch blackness of the boundless mountains. Not a single soul held a lantern to light her path. That night, grand feasts were held in the mansion. Lambs were roasted on spits, and celebrations erupted with the sound of drums and pipes. Halil was wed to the spoiled daughter of the wealthy merchant, a living monument of vanity. Asiye Hanum, at the height of her arrogance, reclining upon silk cushions, sipped her sherbet from golden chalices, celebrating her triumph in ridding herself of Elif. Yet the unerring, terrifying, and swift hand of divine justice would soon strike the very heart of that mansion like a bolt of lightning, like a raging storm. The silent cry of the oppressed, uttered in the freezing winter snow, had already pierced the heavens to reach the divine throne. Not even a few weeks had passed since Elif's departure, when dark, ominous clouds began to gather over that vast, seemingly inexhaustible fortune, over those mountains of gold. First, the wagons carrying the final carpets of Elif's labor and the silk-laden caravans bound for the city were plundered by ruthless bandits on the mountain pass. Men were slaughtered, and not a single coin of that immense fortune ever returned. Then a relentless blight and a devastating frost struck the ancient vineyards. The entire harvest, a lifetime of labor, rotted in a single night, turning into blackened earth. Hundreds of livestock in the pens, cattle and sheep alike, succumbed to an unknown plague, perishing one by one in throes of agony, until the stench of death blanketed the entire village. The mansion's roaring abundance, which once flowed like a torrent, was suddenly severed like a knife by a massive, invisible, divine hand.
The threads on the attic loom were left to rot, the flawed carpets remained unsold, and every venture ended in bitter disappointment, leaving behind a staggering mountain of debt. Driven by pride and a desperate need to sustain her opulent lifestyle, Asiye Hanum accumulated debt upon debt and interest upon interest from banks and ruthless moneylenders alike. As for the nouveau riche bride, when the money ran dry and foreclosure notices began to arrive and debt collectors pounded on the door, she declared, "I did not come here to endure such misery and poverty." Gathering all her gold and jewels, she fled to her father's house in the dead of night, without so much as a backward glance at Halil. She left Halil amidst the ruins of their life, utterly alone, helpless, and destitute. Pride had so blinded Asiye Hanem's eyes and blackened her heart that she remained oblivious to the true cause of her downfall, the curse of the orphan. Instead, she cast the blame upon the innocent servants around her. She lashed out at the stewards, beating them in her rage. Yet the greatest and most bitter of calamities came knocking on that fateful winter night. The moneylenders, accompanied by armed men, seized the grand mansion, the vast fields, and every last remaining possession to settle the debts. Asiye Hanum, who once sat like a queen, issuing commands from golden divans, was cast out of that massive mansion and off those gilded carpets. Just as she had done to Elif, she was thrown into the freezing winter cold, wearing nothing but a thin dress and slippers, without a single penny or a solitary possession to her name. Halil was seized by the gendarmes for his unpaid debts and hauled away to be cast into a dark dungeon. The once mighty matriarch, the cruel Asiye, who believed her wealth was eternal and her power absolute, was transformed in a single night into a wretched, disgraced beggar, shivering in the biting frost, scavenging for bread in the trash, and teetering on the brink of madness. The sycophantic friends, the wealthy merchants, and the relatives who once patted his back had suddenly vanished into thin air, turning their faces away. No one would grant him even a bowl of soup, a simple greeting, or even a stable to sleep in. Arrogance had turned that vast fortune and grandeur into ash, into black earth, and into such agony. But what had become of the orphaned Elif, who had vanished into the darkness and uncertainty that winter night, clutching a broken piece of wood? Just as Elif was about to freeze on the snow in the forest on that frigid night, left to the mercy of wild beasts, she was found by an elderly, white-bearded, and compassionate caravan leader passing by on his way to the city. The man rescued this pure-faced, unconscious, and frozen girl from the brink of death, placed her in his carriage, and took her to the city's largest weavers' guild, entrusting her to his wife. In that guild, that noble sanctuary where no one was oppressed by another's wealth, Elif once again showcased her skill and artistry. With the unique and enchanted carpets she wove, she soon earned the respect and admiration of the entire city. She even garnered the respect and admiration of the Sultan's imperial palace. The purity of her heart and her humble, grateful nature opened such a door of prosperity for her that within a few years, Elif established her own massive workshop. She took in dozens of orphaned and abandoned girls like herself, becoming a mother to them. She protected them, spreading abundance around her like an angel of mercy. She became wealthy, acquired great estates, and earned gold, yet she never succumbed to an ounce of pride. Every day she opened her calloused hands and bowed in a prostration of gratitude. Years later, fate wove its heavy, exemplary, and unerring webs one last time for the greatest trial of all. On a fierce winter day where the snow was blinding, an old beggar woman sought refuge at the door of Elif's warm workshop. Her clothes were in tatters, her face blackened by grime and cold, her body caked in mud, her hands trembling, her back stooped, and her teeth fallen out. The woman moaned at the door for a slice of stale bread and a drop of warm water, rubbing her bruised hands that had turned stiff from the cold, pleading for the sake of God. When Elif heard this heart-wrenching cry from her warm room, her heart, filled with mercy, ached. Throwing her thick fur coat over her shoulders, she rushed outside. As she gazed upon the face of that trembling, wretched woman and into those sunken eyes, she was nearly breathless. Her knees buckled, and her blood ran cold. This miserable, abject woman kneeling before her, begging like a dog for a morsel of bread and a drop of water, was none other than Asiye Hanum, the proud, cruel mother-in-law who, years ago, had kicked her mother's only memento, her dowry chest,
down the stairs, and cast her out into the winter storm to face death. Aleph was struck dumb in the face of this manifestation of divine justice. When Asiya Hanum looked up with her trembling, rheumy eyes and saw Aleph standing before her in magnificent furs, surrounded by respectful servants, looking radiant, powerful, and noble, she felt as though she would lose her mind. She collapsed where she stood, onto the snow and into the mud. Out of shame and that devastating, gnawing regret, she wished the earth would open up and swallow her 7 layers deep. She hid her face in the dark snow and ice, drowning in sobs and screams, letting out a wail that made the heavens and earth tremble. I have found my punishment. I prepared my own end with my own hands. I cast the abundance and the light of my home into the street with my own hands. The wood of that broken chest has pierced my chest, my heart of stone. Forgive me, she cried, beating her knees in despair.
Aleph did not feel a shred of pride in that moment, nor did she succumb to that diabolical thirst for revenge. With warm tears streaming from her eyes, she leaned down gently and took hold of the trembling, mud-stained shoulders of that wretched, pitiful woman, and lifted her from the snow with compassion. She brought her into her warm workshop, seated her in the place of honor, and with her own hands, she placed a bowl of steaming hot soup before her. For Aleph knew that revenge was the pursuit of the weak and those enslaved by pride, whereas mercy and forgiveness belonged to the noble, to those whose hearts were filled with divine light. The greatest revenge was that devastating, that endless remorse that falls upon the oppressor, and Madame Asiye was condemned to burn every day in the hell of this terrible regret. As that warm soup passed through Asiye's throat, it felt like poison, like fire. The divine decree from the heavens had been sealed. A person's dowry was measured not by the gold, money, or property in their chest, but by the mercy within their breast. It was measured by the purity of their brow and the unshakable faith in their heart. No matter how high, no matter how unshakable the towers of pride may be, they were destined to crumble one day, to return to the earth, and to be humbled. Patience, mercy, and gratitude, however, were the greatest, the most precious treasures that carry a person to eternal peace and inexhaustible abundance, both in this fleeting world and in the hereafter.